All right, everybody, we are live for our latest episode of our Gamedev Roundtable Cast, where each month myself and some of my industry friends and experts come on to discuss game design and industry topics. And we got a fun one. We're doing this just before the Thanksgiving holiday season. So let's once again introduce our roundtable to everyone. So for myself, I am of course Josh Blaser and owner of Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. And I'll shoot up to Tomo.
Hi guys, my name is Tomo Moriwaki. I am one of the co-founders of a small dev studio called Hyperkinetic Studios. I've been a game designer forever, and I'm glad to be here.
Hi, I'm Jack Mamias, 25-year veteran of the AAA game industry and currently director of the combat space sim In the Black by Impeller Studios. Now at beta.
Congratulations.
My name's Ramin Shokrizad. I'm probably best known for doing pioneering work in game economics and free-to-play monetization. And I'm currently starting work on a new project in a company called Cloudwalker, and also another company called LiveHive, and recently moved to Australia, where I did blockchain work for about a year.
Awesome.
And I'm Sharky Shark, also known as Jim Tankersley, and I am the CEO of Nexus Games. I've been doing this since about 2004, but professionally since about 2015. And I'm best known for nothing other than being the comedic calf to Josh here.
But you, of course,
you're the Ed McMahon to his Johnny Carson.
Yeah.
If anybody even gets that anymore.
Probably not.
But you are, of course, working on your game Neon Continuum right now.
Right.
And Shark has recently joined the YouTuber game streaming and game dev group as well.
Yeah, indeed I have.
And Ramin, it's great to have you on. I know when we first spoke like this, like several months ago, we were planning on having you on for the roundtables, and then with the whole everything going on and your move to Australia, we kind of like lost touch here. But it's great to have you on for one of these talks again.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I was also having laptop problems, and my laptop ended up being buried, so I got a new laptop.
All right.
Did you have to put it in the freezer again?
It was a Dell. What can I say?
All right, but we have yet another really great roundtable planned for everyone watching this live or recorded. As always, for the people watching, if you have any questions for our panel, feel free to leave them in the chat and we will get to them. But our topic for this month is kind of a continuation from last month. Last month, we talked about the challenges of putting a price tag on a game. For this one, we're going to talk about how do you add value to a title, as in through its game's design. Like, how do you get the most money or the most value out of whatever mechanics you're using? And this is a very interesting topic, and I have my first question for the group here. And this is something that I've been thinking about with some of the indie games I've been playing. That over the last few weeks, we played some very great small indie games. Dojuro was one, even something like Bug Snacks, and there was another one that the name escapes me at the moment. And these games were good. Were they the best examples of their genre? No. But they were each priced at like $4.99 or $10.99 or whatever it was. And the thought occurred to me is there anything here that could push this into being like a $10 game or a $15 game? Or is there just like an inherent limit, I guess, in terms of what your mechanics can offer? So I'm going to throw that out to the roundtable, and anyone who wants to start off, feel free.
Well, I would say when you're looking at adding value to game design, you shouldn't just look at the value of the end product. You should look at the value of, or the cost of production. A good game design can lower production costs substantially and that's adding value because that lowers the threshold between failure and commercial success. So one of the, I think, most important things about a game design is when you write it. If you write it after production's already started, you can expect near constant revisions and a team that doesn't really know what they're doing, and that just means more time, more money wasted. If you've got an A to Z design before you even start production, that can lower the time to reach market and the cost substantially. That'd be my first one. And the second thing I would mention, or should I pause for discussion, or should I just keep going?
Keep going.
Mhm.
I would say sometimes less is more in game design, in the sense that, like, for instance, in Cloudwalker, I want to have an auto battler as part of my gameplay that has over 500 unique units in it. They're unique in the sense that they're different and distinct, but you could have more than one of each of them. So there could be massive team battles with these team auto battlers. But the thing is, I want to plan for making that many units in the future, and I don't want the production costs to get too high. So I'm planning on, even though I have a budget where I could go AAA, I'm going to try to keep the graphics 2D or 2.5D, so that I'd rather go for like quantity there than try to make each one look fantastic. I also try to reduce the scope. Like, using an auto battler is a great way to reduce the scope of the gameplay environment. So you don't have like people running around in an open world where that's really expensive to deliver to the user, but doesn't really necessarily give the user any added benefit. In fact, they may actually see that as negative, where they have to run around just to get to the next gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
I'll stop there.
Can you repeat the question again? I was looking at my student in the chat, so I didn't hear the question.
That's all right. The question is, for games that are priced like really low, like $4, $6, is there a way to add value to these games to bump them up to maybe being a $10 game or a $15 game? Or is there just like an inherent limit on how far you can kind of stretch a game?
Well, at Activision, we used to look at it like, how much are you paying for an hour of gameplay? You know, and you look at a movie, basically, when you see it like an hour of entertainment. You look at a movie, and a movie you're paying, you know, if you go to an IMAX movie, you're paying about what, $8 an hour to see a feature or something like that at this point, or $10 an hour to see a feature. So are you giving them enough to, you know, if it's a $4 game, are you giving them, you know, an hour of gameplay essentially? So I guess you just look at pure content and say, how long are you keeping them entertained, and make sure that there is, like, I would say certainly adding multiplayer to something would add value to it in any way, because you're going to, you know, or even replayability or procedural based aspects of the game or emergent gameplay, that's going to be adding a lot of value to it, because they're going to be spending more time on it. Whereas if it's a narrative game that you go through in 30 minutes, you know, all you can do is just add more narrative, but I don't think you're going to really astronomically affect, you know, how long they play the game and what they get as value out of the game. And gamers today are, I hate to say it, they're super spoiled, because there's so many free-to-play games out there. You know, almost everything on mobile is free-to-play. And, you know, I download tons of mobile. I download anything that I get an ad for when I'm playing another game. So I'm just getting. They're all free, and they're all, you know, they're all at least 2 hours of gameplay before you get to the wall where you've got to start throwing money in it to actually continue to have a good experience. So you're automatically competing with that right off the board. Is the free to play out there, and that definitely has changed it. On the other hand, I went to Best Buy today and saw the new Call of Duty was I believe $69, right? And you know, I used to be 59. I guess they went up $10, and you know, I was like, wow. And I started to think, it's like, I guess that's a good, basically unlimited gameplay with the multiplayer and stuff like that. So, and obviously they're going to sell, 20 or 30 million copies. So people find value in that. So it's all over the board.
Mm-hmm.
I really think that Tim would have been a good person to have on for this talk, because like he really does like really milk every mechanic, every last drop out of the mechanics that he does. He will get one mechanic like a poison, and he'll just slightly tweak it and get like 20 other things out of it. And he'll take one. He'll just take every system and just turn it into many different systems in its own right. And he just really min-maxes the heck out of that. And I think that is definitely a good way to add value to a game like that, because I think that they could, those games you're referring to, could have done some of that and gotten a lot more out of it. And it wouldn't have costed basically anything to do. Mm-hmm. And then there's also they could have just added more systems. I mean, that would have added more cost.
Yeah.
But, that would be a way to get more value out of it if they were systems that went along with the core gameplay loop and everything. But you run into issues of cost and everything, but not every system is going to cost a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
As Tim was saying, I think the multiplayer is probably the best, cheapest content you can add to extend your gameplay, because it's basically all user-generated content like that, like we were talking about in that Medium article that I read today that you posted recently, where companies are trying to take advantage of users as user-generated content or just content, but they generally do a pretty bad job of it. But you can see the most successful cheap casual games out right now are multiplayer games, and that's what keeps people playing, is the multiplayer component.
Mm-hmm.
Mod support also plays into that very heavily. The user-generated content.
I mean, look at Pokemon Go. Pokemon Go would have been a lot less interesting. It wasn't the fact that you were just meeting your neighbors when you played that game. It made it quite a lot more interesting.
Mm-hmm. And I have a thought, but I want to throw it to you, Tomo. Do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think it's worth talking about the different perspectives people might have on the pricing of a product, right? That they're pricing against the value proposition to the user, and that the more concrete things may not be necessarily the more important things. Like, let's say this experience delivers 100 hours of gameplay and another experience delivers 1. Are you expecting the one that delivers 100 times more gameplay to be 100 times as expensive? And obviously that's not how it actually plays out. Trying to, I think that there's if you take the complexity of the experience, that there are points in the field of possibility that are much more valuable to our users than other points, and that if you can find it just right, it creates a humongous swell of value, even if it's not a significant increase in time. And so as a result, you can charge a great deal more. Like there's much more that the audience is getting out of that, or at least maybe that shrinks an audience as it gets more specific. But I think that take a product like Journey, for example, which was $15 for 45 minutes or maybe an hour and a half of gameplay. And to be fair, they spent an extreme amount of money to make the game. But it's a simple and kind of easy to grasp example of trying to go for something unique from an experiential standpoint, and charging more because of it. And I think in that case it played out, right? The value to users through that novelty, as a result of high production values, very effectively overcame some of the other measures we might make in terms of overall amount of time. Although I could have an infinite conversation about what complexity does to value. And that it's not that having it be more complex makes you spend more time. It's that depth and complexity is trying to take your existing systems and buy more gameplay at a discount, basically, with your resources.
And I got that infinite conversation with you as well, Tomo. And
Another thing is like the first like 30 minutes to an hour is like the most important time, and like getting the most value you can right there is like the most important to hold on to all your players that you already have.
Sorry.
Because it doesn't matter if you have a 300-hour game if they don't play for longer than 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that is, again, like another one of those points about, all those like little X factors that add a perception of value to a game. Like, we've played lots of games over those last 2 years from the developers that they have amazing gameplay to them, but they lack in aesthetics. Or maybe, their UI is cumbersome. And it doesn't matter what your game's priced at, especially if people can just refund in 2 hours today.
Mm-hmm.
I went back to try to play Might and Magic 10 last night. And a lot of the reviews were saying, oh, this is a really cool, in-depth game. But it's still got a very negative review, and I found out why. I mean, when I tried to play it, I couldn't. I'll give you one guess why I couldn't play Might and Magic 10.
Would it be the UI, or is it something?
Crash
It's a Ubisoft. It's a Ubisoft product. This is a guess. This is a hint.
You need to register it online.
Huh? Uplay? Did you heard of Uplay?
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't play it because Uplay was in the way. It would not let me into the game that I had bought.
Yeah, I hit that when I try to play the VR Star Trek game. I think Bridge Crew.
Mm-hmm.
You get it ready to play in, and then because I play it very infrequently, and then all of a sudden Uplay pops up, and I'm like, oh my god, I don't even remember my password for that stupid thing, and I put it away. It's like Uplay is definitely a nightmare.
Yeah, I've had okay experience with Uplay. It was Origin that gave me a lot of trouble. I was trying to play a SimCity Societies, and while it's on there, in order to install it, the game has to dial into whatever server they've set up for the installation, and that server's down, so you literally can't finish the installation of SimCity Societies. Now, one thing I wanted to touch on that Shark said about being able to add more in terms of mechanics and systems. That I remember the other game that was on my list. It was this game called Shiro. This was kind of a 2D platformer, not exactly like Kaizo, but maybe like Kaizo adjacent in terms of its difficulty. And we played it, it's $4.99, and we got an hour out of it. And I think it was like 4 sections long. Not the worst game, not the best game. And it just kind of ended. I don't know if you managed to catch the recording of that, Shark, but we played it, and like all of a sudden it's like we're playing, there's a section, oh, the game's over, we win. Like it just seemed to come out of nowhere. And with like a game like this, we were talking about in terms of could they have added more to this game without just seeming like padding it out? And this is, I think, where it gets very tricky in terms of mechanics, because with any of these games, we can always say, and Shark and I, we joke about this, you can just add more levels. Just copy and paste a level, maybe instead of going left to right, go right to left, call it a new stage. But I do think there's at some point, like, diminishing returns on mechanics. Like, knowing when to end a game is often, part of the art itself.
Yeah, a shorter game can often be better, but because you want to have, enough content that you're not just repeating content and we're to ad nauseum kind of thing. But if you have enough content to go the long distance, then you want the longer distance kind of thing. It really depends on what level of content you have kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like depending on the specifics of the experience that you offer, certain experiences are more tolerant of repetition than others. And if an experience can be repeated, I feel like you're making a real big mistake by not repeating it. But some experiences, for example, like let's say there was a puzzle where you need to move one block over one unit, and then you win. That puzzle's not terribly repeatable, right? I mean, yeah, your mind completely understands everything about the puzzle, and doing that again offers very little benefit, unless maybe you're telling a Stanley Parable-like joke of some sort, in which case maybe it can go somewhere. So at the same time, if there's like a multiplayer shooter experience, you can repeat that almost endlessly because its internal mechanisms require you to like do it so many times to kind of even learn the basics of it.
And again, like as Ramin was talking about earlier with multiplayer, and what I wrote about in those various pieces, that it's one of the reasons why we've seen so many developers embrace multiplayer components or just having that cooperative competitive play, because the player base at that point is essentially the content, what we talk about, user generated content. And it's definitely, I think, one way of going. I mean, we've all seen Among Us at this point, and Among Us is a game that it is not a complicated game to play. So much of that game is derived from its multiplayer component. If you don't have 6, 7 people to play with, the game is utterly worthless to you. If you get those people, it's a very enjoyable time. Or when Shark stabs me in the back on Friday nights.
Or at least as long as it's people who are not trolls, anyway. A.k.a. randoms.
So here's another question I want to ask everyone. Obviously, with this panel, we have 4 people on who have released games, you've priced content within those games. My question is this. When we talk like 5, 6 years ago, kind of like at like the peak of the quote-unquote indie-pocalypse, there was this whole discussion about games are only going to be 99 cents, or, if you don't release your indie game at $2.99, nobody's going to buy it. And one of the positives that we've seen is that game prices are being pushed up. We're seeing more games being released at like $15, $24, $30, and they are doing well. Stuff like Desperados 3, Disco Elysium. There's probably a few other ones I'm forgetting. A Monster Train that came out earlier this year. So the question for the panel is, do you think we are entering a period where $4.99 and less is not really a sound strategy to release a game under anymore?
I would say yes. I would say, I like right now, I think the normal, like, I guess you'd call it cheap indie or inexpensive indie is normally around $15. I mean, you can find games certainly below that, but normally when you look at games below that, they really lack in some way. Generally, not always, but as a general rule, they seem to be more like a hobbyist that released their game kind of thing rather than a indie studio that released a game kind of thing where you find at $15. And I see a trend of that turning into 20 right now. And indies, based off of, how crowded the stores are and everything, you kind of have to have a higher price so that you can actually have a decent chance at breaking even, because there's just so many more games out there. And you're going to henceforth sell less because of the overcrowding, and you have to get more per sale to break even at that rate.
I think the pandemic has changed user behavior significantly just in the last year. I think before, players were looking for maybe smaller chunks that they could just play for a bit and get back out and go back to the other activities. But now that they're in front of their computers a lot more than they were before, and engaging a lot less social activity than they were before, for good or bad, I think they're, again, circling back and looking for longer, more repeatable, immersive gameplay, which unfortunately the market really doesn't have a lot of that right now. We kind of we don't really make that much AAA anymore, and our indie games, a lot of them just don't have that much content. So I think there's kind of a mismatch right now, just because people weren't anticipating that.
That's a good question. I'm new to the world of indie games, and I'm making a free-to-play game, so it's a completely different pricing structure. That you just want to get a lot of players, and then you hope they love you enough that they'll buy cosmetics from you and keep you afloat, which is completely different. And we've recently put out a beta, and we definitely are getting a lot of feedback on what we should have in there. And the game right now, probably just as a single player experience, probably has about 3 hours of gameplay, and then it has multiplayer on top of that. So there's a good 10 hours of gameplay out of there. And we're looking at probably, if we do early access where you actually will start selling it, even though it's a free to play game, we're looking at about $20 for that. And $20 is I think $20 is a pretty easy price to get out of people, because people think of it as a 20 and it's not a big deal. So I would think anything from 0 to 20, I would say you could go up to 20 pretty easily. I wouldn't think just because a game is $5.99 or a game is $10.99 or 20, I don't think that's going to be, if the game is good enough to make the $5.99, then I think it's probably good enough to make the $20, at least. That's my guess. Like I said, I'm kind of new to the indie world game. All my games before were the old $59.99 vibe, and you had a mega machine selling it, so it's a completely different vibe than you have to get it out and get the word out yourself and stuff like that. So it's a different world for sure.
So yeah, I think I talked a little bit about this, I think, on the last stream, but from our perspective, we felt that the types of Steam audiences that like to spend money aren't terribly limited by total cost. Rather, they're limited by whether their attention is grabbed. And so there's this top 1% of the Steam user base that has, let's say, over 150 games, maybe only over 50. Crazy thing worth noting: half of the 150 some odd million monthly active Steam members have 4 or less games. Something to keep in mind. But that top 1% has many, many games, and they buy many, many games. And so if you start looking for, we felt like in our analysis that there was this, the top 1% in this case, let's say being 1.5 million users, and that 1.5 million users is kind of divided between really football manager style spin tires, farming simulator, they'll play those kinds of games, but there's a big chunk of them that won't touch those kinds of games. And then that's the indie Darkest Dungeon, Terraria kind of crowd. And so it kind of looks like you could stand to, at least at a high level, a critical level of success, or moderate levels, I don't know, a good, very solid success can get you in the several hundred thousands of units sold. And then it's kind of a matter of tuning your against your budget. If you can make the game for 100,000, you can afford to sell it for a lot less, and obviously a lower price is going to trigger people to buy it easier. There's some amount less resistance. It's not going to be linearly less resistant to buy as you reduce price, but very loosely, less cost, easier to buy for given user. I think that there's some element of, if your game is really weird and it has no established user base, sometimes going inexpensive is a benefit, because it can maybe reduce the barrier for people to try something that makes no sense to them. I think that there is a valid space for those low cost games, but I think what's a good product to price low obviously has to be relatively low budget, but in terms of the other factors, kind of fluctuates. I think that if you go back maybe 6 or so years, a small story-rich game might very well do a lot better at $4.99 than at $14.99, just because the audience wasn't necessarily ready for it. Now, today's world, you see, I see a game like that, and it's $29.99, and if there's enough of a history behind it, and maybe it's the next Inkle game or something, and they've been talking about some new innovations of some sort in the way they approach their games, and I'm like, I need to jump in early. I need to play the game. I need to see what they're up to, and then I pull the trigger without a second thought.
I think the opposite of that is also true, where you were talking about how like a lower price can get people in, a higher price could also get people in, and that's kind of on a weirder game because that's what we've seen with Disco Elysium.
Mm-hmm. And I to like Tomo's point about kind of story-driven games, I was just looking up Amnesia, for instance, and the original Amnesia is now priced at $19, while Amnesia Rebirth is priced at $30. And like story-driven or story-focused games are definitely that very like weird section we talk about value, I think. Because we've seen a lot of those titles. What Remains of Edith Finch, Gone Home, was it Vanishing of Ethan Carter, and so on, that they are typically priced higher than their contemporaries, or even just other, like, maybe more mechanically driven games. And it's always fascinating about how much, like, a story in these kinds of games tends to sell it to their audience. Like, for myself, like, I couldn't see spending $30 on Amnesia, even if I was a huge fan, because I'm just not a story-driven guy. But it does seem like there's a market there for people who value like a very focused, like 2 hours of gameplay, firing on all cylinders, and then that's it. Versus, say, an 8 to 10 hour experience that could vary based on the content.
I'm taking a little bit of a gamble with my latest project, and I'm planning for before we even start production, designing out three years of content before we even start programming. And it's very social, starting with teams of 15, and I'm actually reteaching people to be social, so that by the time they get to year 2, their team size is 100 or more. And these are all people who are interacting together and battling together every day. So that there's more of that peer cohesion and ultimately a peer pressure to spend, such that there's also play to earn, so that players will be able to develop rare content and then sell it back to each other. And I'm expecting in my business model there'll be some items that by year 2 players will be selling to each other for between $1.5 and $2 million.
And since you
Wow.
Talked to me about that on our cast last week, I was like, I had a question that came in my mind. I have to remember to ask you when we're done here, because I was thinking about how that would work from a financial model too.
Yeah, obviously it's not like anything that's been made before, so it's very experimental.
Yeah. Now, I guess another question that I have for everyone. And this kind of the last question was on the low end of the scale. We're talking about trying to bump up $4.99, $6.99 games. This next question is going to be more on the reverse side of that. When we start looking at games that are at
I'm out of my element with the $5 games.
This is about the games that, as we've said, are trying to push further with their designs or push in some aspects. So this is the $24 and up games. So stuff like Monster Train, Disco Elysium, Shadow Tactics, and even Desperados 3. Like, this is when we start seeing indie developers trying to get further with their designs. And my question for everyone is, what do you think justifies, or in some sense, that higher price tag? Like, as a case in point, Monster Train is $25. Slay the Spire, I think, was $20. And Monster Slayers, this was the kind of deck building roguelike that started to set that foundation. I think this came out in 2017, was $9. So what did like Slay the Spire or Monster Train do, or if they did anything differently, to say this is a higher price version of this kind of design?
Well, I think they have to have good aesthetics. They have to have good polish, and they have to either offer a lot of replayability or a long enough playtime. Because they need to have people to be able to put in a lot of hours total into the game. I feel on those kind of cases, because I think generally like a short game there, unless it was just like blow your mind amazing kind of thing, like something that you couldn't stop talking about for weeks, I don't think it would do well if it was just that limited amount of content.
I played a lot of Slay the Spire, and I played a fair amount of Monster Train, and I would say I got more value out of Slay the Spire. I certainly played it quite a lot more. But I would say with Monster Train, the visually it was so much more interesting that even though I didn't play it as much, I feel like I certainly got my money's worth when I played that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, yeah, from a pure value standpoint, Slay the Spire is pretty insane. It's really good.
Hard to beat.
I mean,
Yes.
well, and I'll bring back the other thought. This idea of the way in which you handle your systems and the way you build depth, the complexity in design or sound complexity in your game's design is ultimately just you trying to get more valid content out of your system's interactions. So in a lot of ways, depth is trying to buy more gameplay time at a discount because I'm reusing what I had and reconfiguring it to make more valid time for the user.
Yeah, I mean, like I personally, I sort of bounced off of Slay the Spire. Like the one time I made it to the final boss, the boss had the perfect build against me, and I stood no chance. And after that, I quit. Like, I was no longer interested in it. But like Monster Train, I played the heck out of it. I put so many hours into it because you knew what the final boss was going to be. You knew what build he was going to destroy, so you could plan and not be destroyed. Where it's RNG purely with the Slay the Spire.
Yeah, I remember that. You got churned out because of uncertainty, ultimately, right? And in the context of Slay the Spire, it is very much a game about uncertainty. You can never know when that cherry run is going to happen and when things are going to fall together and you're going to be vastly overpowered, at least at first, right? Which will actually give you the motive force to get to maybe the end of chapter 4 somehow.
Yeah, the problem was I was overpowered, and it didn't do me any good because the way I was overpowered made me perfectly weak to the final boss.
I think in most roguelikes, you should just automatically expect to die horribly on your first run. It's just the way the games are built.
I think that was like my 8th run, but it was the first run I had made it to the final boss.
Oh, sorry, Sharky.
And that was like, yep, nope, I quit.
Yeah, and talking about like roguelike design, I think is another like very interesting part of this, because in my book that I wrote about roguelike design, I spoke about how much developers have been borrowing or taking elements of roguelike design over the last like 5-6 years, whether it's stuff like FTL, Slay the Spire, the whole deck building scheme, and these games are meant to be replayed. I know a board fan is putting a comment there about replay value, and replay value has been, I think, a very interesting aspect of this kind of pricing. Like, for instance, have any of you heard of the game Caves of Quid by any chance?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Like, Caves of Quid, for those of you who don't know, is a kind of like an open world style traditional roguelike. It is priced at $15, so it's right kind of like what we're discussing. It's kind of like, like the bottom line of, I guess, bottom of high quality, safely extreme there. And it's a game that, when you first look at it, it looks very much like every other traditional roguelike that we've seen. Maybe it has a little better graphics here and there. But for the people who play it, they have described, there's probably hundreds of hours of experience in this game. And, like, roguelikes have always been very weird in terms of that whole, price, dollars to hours comparison, like people like to make. I've spent a good 100 hours in the Binding of Isaac at this point. I think I paid, like $8 for it. And conversely, I've spent about 32 hours in Spelunky 2, and I think I'm reaching my fill on that. And the question is, again, what's the money's worth? Like, is there even the possibility of saying I got my money's worth out of this game when I spend $20 for 32 hours or 100 hours for $10.
I think content is a very tricky double-edged sword. I mean, players want a lot of content, but what they don't want is all that content dropped on their face in the first 15 minutes.
Yep.
Like Wizard and Warlocks promises to be an incredibly deep 4X game and a huge improvement on Master of Magic, but there's like the onboarding is like non-existent, and I just have no idea what I'm doing when I load up that game. So it really doesn't do me any good if there's all this content that I don't have access to. I mean, even something like a game like Dominions 4 is a little easier to onboard, but that's just, there's like a 350-page rule manual, which I will read because I want to have a good experience. But if you don't read the 350-page rule manual, you won't know what the heck you're doing when you load that game up, and it's not graphically, pleasant to look at. So it's all the you're coming to that game for the content, right? So a game that can do it all, very pleasant appearance on the onboarding, good tutorials and handholds you through, starts off simple but promises massive complexity later. I mean, it just seems to be hard to pull off. I mean, I'm obviously going to try to do it on my next run, but it's and you got to be really careful. You don't want to overwhelm your customer, but you do want to tease them with all this content down the road.
You got to make that first hour has got to be dynamite, and then if you hook them, and you've got enough content in there, they'll walk away loving the game, even if they never finish it. But if they have that first solid hour of gameplay, and it's like, okay, I want to play more, and I'm going to open it up more. I think you've got them, and you could probably look at your content and say, okay, we've got this many hours of gameplay, so we feel it's worth about this much. And players will generally walk away feeling pretty good about it.
I know that teasing them was like the one thing that I messed up on in the last game, because like we had it, but we had everything else with the onboarding and all that, but we didn't tease them enough to let them know that there was all this depth coming and whatnot.
And then on our show this past Sunday, Shark, we were talking about replay value. And one of the things that we discussed was that ultimately your goal is that you want the player to leave your game feeling like they're happy, that they don't want to stop playing your game because they're annoyed or because they're frustrated. They want to leave the game, whether it's, the game is done and I had a great time, or it's, 6 o'clock in the morning, I need to get to bed before I go to work. I just spent all night playing whatever kind of game. And it is incredibly difficult, as you guys were saying. Like, that first hour is so key. And I've said this many times, like, for me, I've even gone even worse than that. For me, it's 30 minutes. You have 30 minutes to convince me that your game is worth playing. If you can get me past that mark, I'll typically play, 10, 20, 30 hours. If not, I'm done. Like, I don't care if you say that there's still 400 more hours of this game. You got 30 minutes out of me, nice to see you. I'm never going to play this game again.
For me, with mobile games, it's more like 10 minutes. As soon as I start playing a mobile game and they throw me into that tycoon vibe where it's like, okay, you need to build the headquarters, and now start clicking. I'm out of there as soon as I see that.
I call that the Excel spreadsheet game.
Is that what it is? I just I mean, you see these amazing ads for this thing, you're like, oh God, I gotta play that game, and then as soon as you start playing, it's like, it's the same game. My God, as soon as I see that, I am out of it.
You're going to be on row 1 of the Excel spreadsheet for 10 minutes, and you're going to be on row 2 of the Excel spreadsheet for 30 minutes, and you're going to be on row 3 of the Excel spreadsheet for 2 hours, and you're going to be on row 4 of the Excel spreadsheet for 6 hours. It's all planned out.
Yep.
It's all, you're on the railroad tracks. It's not only predictable, but it's the same game every time. I mean, if you play, there's 20, 30 different titles using the same Excel spreadsheet.
I bet it's more than that. They must be making money though, because they keep putting them out. Like another one.
Well, my innovation is that row 7 is 15% longer.
That's totally worth the money.
Oh, it's a premium game. I see.
Yeah. There we go. And to bring this back to kind of like presentation and aesthetics, as both as Ramin was talking about with onboarding and Charles was talking about with the art games. Like, this is something I think we've seen, especially in the independent space. Like, if we look at kind of like current gen or quote unquote current gen indie stuff like Monster Train, Desperados, Disco Elysium, like developers are really putting a lot more into that kind of look and feel. Like, there's still people out there who say indie just means your game just looks like pixel art. Like, that's all indie development is just pixel art. But when we look at even going back a few years ago, like Hollow Knight, for instance, like if you put a screenshot of Hollow Knight next to like a major studio, like a 2D side scrolling game, it looks like it was done by like a massive team of people. And it just seems like a lot of this kind of growing in value has been from like independent developers really trying to push what it means to sell a game. Because even though I was joking about the whole 2D pixel art, there are still a lot of developers, and if we look over the last 10 years, there are a ton of games that use that same kind of art and trying to emulate that same aesthetic. And a lot of those games just kind of quickly disappear when they get released.
But there's the there's the high res pixel art that really can blow people away, like the Lazy Bear pixel art. Although their gameplay lacks, but their pixel art is on point.
I'm having to Google all these games you guys are talking about because I don't know any of them. Any of them.
Google Hades then too, because Hades is outstanding.
Yes,
I heard about Hades. I usually, since I'm a professor in my day job, I usually have my students tell me what to play because what the best game is. Have you seen Hades and Darkest Dungeon? And so I'll go, I'll check that out, and I'll play those games that they're totally into. But I must be getting games from a different place. Are you guys like just downloading from Steam or where's all these games? I guess are Steam games, right?
Steam and Epic for me.
Steam and Epic. So so those two platforms seem to be those two platforms seem to own that $5 to $20 range basically, whereas mobile games are definitely free to play. I see very few games on mobile that cost anything.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the ones that might have cost something have gone the route of Apple Arcade. Although my kids get a lot out of Apple Arcade, and they're showing me stuff all the time, and there's a lot of neat stuff going on there.
My niece showed me Roboblocks, and she tried to get me to play that.
Oh my goodness!
I had no idea what that was all about. Right? It's like, wow, this is really terrible, but she just was in love with it. And it was the stupidest game mechanics I've ever seen in my life, but she's playing it and I bet they've made $1 million on that game basically.
No, it's way more than that.
we still need to have our anti-Fortnite fan club cast at some point.
Yeah, we're
Roblox,
probably
one of the
talking
biggest games in the world. It's like Minecraft scale.
Yeah.
And I think they're going public soon.
Yeah, we're talking about Minecraft and Fortnite scale of money kind of thing.
Unbelievable.
Probably over Stardew Valley.
Studying Roblox, studying Minecraft, it's worthy of anyone who's interested in the game industry's time.
Mm-hmm. So, I guess building off of that, I guess here's another question for everyone. When we talk about games like that have really blown up over the last year, again, or even over the last few years, Minecraft, Roblox, Among Us, Fall Guys, etc., that these games, from a mechanics standpoint, they're not the deepest games. I mean, a few minutes ago we mentioned the Minions series. The Minions is, as far away from those games as a title can get. Yet, these titles tend to pull people in and keep them in for, relatively low costs, or at least, quote-unquote low costs. Are there any, thoughts or insights about a game like Fall Guys, for instance, that it has a $20 buy-in, very simple gameplay, but that gameplay loop is so involving for the people who get into it that, they're more than happy to play that game for, dozens if not hundreds of hours, where, if someone tried to release a single-player version of that game, maybe you get, an hour or two at tops out of that design. And I know obviously this touches a lot on user-generated content as well.
Yeah, I think if Fall Guys was a single player game, it wouldn't have succeeded. It would have probably failed very, very horribly. But because the gameplay loop doesn't really lend much until you add more players. And then once you add more players, like when you're just single player, it's just you running through doors and everything and do a minor bit of platforming. But when you have all the players there, everybody's bumping everybody out of the way and everybody's, trying to sabotage everybody else. And, it just, the social aspect of that game just is basically the game. Outside of that, there's not really much there kind of thing.
But that and Among Us definitely are the games that I'm seeing a lot of influencers play, and they really are running their whole channel just playing those games, and you're getting tons and tons of views, and they're just bringing more and more people into it. So it's you've done enough that you've got somebody's interest, like Felicia Day or one of those other people who run their channel just playing games, and then it takes off, right? Because it's like they want to play that game that their hero's playing. So, that's kind of an outside influence on the game personally that might not have been there if they weren't playing it. Maybe it wouldn't have had that kind of life.
Yeah. But that I think that's really a different topic with YouTuber games and whatnot, because they also like the rage games that have like no replayability or basically none. They're not even good games. They're just things to react to in an insane way.
Mm-hmm.
I've designed a lot of games at this point, and I've not designed a single game that was where there were going to be less than 30 people playing at the same time. I'm all about more people, more social, and I'm trying to ramp that way up. So that you'll have 150 people on a team in the end game in Cloudwalker, because I think more is better up to a certain point, as long as you're eliminating anonymity. I don't want 150 people who don't know each other, because that's just going to create toxicity. I want 150 people who know each other by name, and that takes time. So you're building it up over time, so that initially it's 15 players, but by the time you get to the end game, it's 150 players, and they've all been playing together for like a year. And I figured that's where you're going to really get the ultra premium experience, where people really want to log in each day, not just for the game, but just for their fellow players. And at that point, there's going to be like no limit to how much they're willing to spend. And if it's by adding in play to earn, players will be paying each other, and can do that with the help of blockchain technology, so that we don't even have to be involved, and it's secure trading. People can set whatever prices they want.
And as a quick time check, we are about like 58 minutes in, so I figure maybe another 15-20 minutes, and then is that good for everyone to wrap things up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure, that works.
And for the chat, this will be kind of last call or close to last call for any questions on this topic that you want to ask the panel. Feel free to get them in.
The panel.
Yes. Because we can just keep talking for like 5 to 6 hours. Like when we need the stream, we can just ramble on. I guess building off of that, off of discussion about multiplayer, this was something that was brought up earlier regarding kind of single player versus multiplayer games. And I'm not sure this will be a spicy take or, just like a controversy. But what is everybody's thoughts on the idea of pricing when it comes to a single player game versus a multiplayer? As in specifically, do you think multiplayer really can justify, let's say, I don't know, adding $20 to a game's price tag? And if a game is single player only, it could maybe only go to $30 at most you could charge for it, or something like that.
I don't think so. I think multiplayer generally does good two ways. Or actually really three. One way is free to play, because free to play gets you all the players. The maximum number of players that you can get, you'll get, kind of thing. Except for people who will not play free to play games. then on the other hand, when you have multiplayer, you can do that premium experience with just so much stuff. But on the other hand, there are also the multiplayer games that are not really just multiplayer games. It's just a multiplayer version of your single player game. So like you have like your 7 Days to Die, your Don't Starve kind of thing in that kind of category where, the multiplayer is adding a lot to it, but you're more playing with friends, or some people are probably playing on select servers that they go to kind of thing. But like it's not like a full like open multiplayer system kind of thing like you would see in your free to plays and your more premium kind of experiences.
Right. I appreciate the work that developers do in making single player games, but honestly, I would never and have never made a single player game. I can charge literally 100 times more for a massive multiplayer game than I can for a single player experience. And it doesn't cost me 100 times more to make a massive multiplayer game. So for me, the math is it's an automatic no-brainer. Always go big or go home.
Yeah. That's scary advice.
Yeah. The thing with multiplayer though is that you really need to get user acquisition. Whether it's a smaller title or a bigger title. Like if you put it out there and very few users come, then your game is done, kind of thing. Like we've seen that with what was that one that I forget the name of it. It came out and it was, I think, sort of Fortnite-y, and they had that wheel that you spin that
Lawbreakers?
I think that might have been it. Yeah, that failed really horribly, fantastically horribly. So like it is risky.
You've hit the nail on the head, Sharky. It's all if you can't bring enough players and get players to tell other players to come in, then you're dead. So it's a little bit high risk.
What's kind of interesting as we're having this discussion, I'm thinking about Mortal Kombat 11 at the moment, and kind of like NetherRealm has kind of done in terms of trying to add more value to the fighting game genre. And what they've really tried to embrace, especially with MK11, is trying to do both in terms of single player and multiplayer based design. Like, they released, I think, a story expansion of the game earlier this year. I think they have another one planned. And of course, they're putting out new characters, new cosmetics, and so on. But it is such an interesting idea of how much they've been really trying to push MK11 as not just a single player and not just a multiplayer game, but just, this entire experience.
I think in general, it's a, of course there's plenty of exceptions out there, but in general, I think it's better to focus on either just a single player mode or just a multiplayer mode. Because like you need to give both enough attention. There are exceptions to that, like 7 Days to Die and Don't Starve, where, there's not really all that much that changes between the single player and the multiplayer. And that's really where, the combo, I think, shines. But when you have it where it's going to be a very, very different game in both modes, I think it's usually better to focus on one over both.
So, in terms of single player versus multiplayer, I don't think that that's the delineation that is representative of any fixed price margin, right? It's that like in that kind of $15 to $30 Steam game range, there's a whole slew of single player games, and they're evolving, and there's a bunch of new stuff that's coming out from those developers on a totally regular basis. And there are winners and there are losers and all of that. It's that there's an audience for those games, and so to that audience, they have experience with these games. and they'll see your game, and to whatever extent you can message being a part of their culture, and then pricing yourself appropriately. It's like, I know what you want, and I'm messaging that effectively to you, and that's why I'm putting my price at the higher range of what you're expecting for this kind of market space, right? And like mobile and multiplayer, for example, there's not a ton of intersection between that audience and maybe people that want to play Life is Strange. Like, those are two still vastly different users in a lot of cases, right? And so if you make a game for one, you're doing something fundamentally different than for the other. And even like, I agree with the sentiment of go big or go home. And I would say for large scale, massively multiplayer game, there is no bigger show, right? Because the threshold you need to cross for success is quite high, and you know, the people that get in there are at the very least very brave. But the potential winnings for being a winner in that space is outrageously high. That said, you have people who make a single player game like what's the space game that like no like it was like the quadrillions of No Man's Sky. You take a game like No Man's Sky that was made by a relatively small team, and in its first month on Steam probably made like $50 million, and they probably didn't spend a whole lot of money to get there. They're a very big winner in the space, and then they were able to take that and kind of continue that process. It's because of their audience. It's not like any of the rules that we might imagine between single player and multiplayer apply to them, right? What they found a valid solution and went with it. And we might even have a lot of criticisms because obviously there was some amount of controversy around No Man's Sky when it launched.
Just some.
You hit on the third piece of advice I had, which was know your audience. You got to know what the needs are of your target demographic, and ideally you've identified a need that just isn't being filled by any product in the market. And so if you can identify what that need is and effectively fill that need in a situation where you have no competition, then I think with a modest marketing budget, you can be quite successful.
Question from Brian in chat. Are you aware of any technical/institutional constraints that limit the AAA multiplayer design/results? Anything that agile indie could exploit for a competitive edge?
Design skill is the limiting factor for AAA.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that indie exploits all the time because the best designers are in the indie sphere, not the AAA sphere. I mean, I hate to say it, just the way it is.
And
a lot of that's cronyism. You know, once you get it, you're in the right position in AAA, you can make sure no one better than you gets hired.
There's also more friction at that scale. You know, I think that the old development model of large scale console games is kind of maybe a little brittle and accommodates scale up to some degree poorly. And I think a lot of choices, like I used to joke around at EA when we were working on Medal of Honor and say, all right, to the new designers, today's the day we determine whether we add one feature to the game or zero. They didn't like that at all.
Let's see. Board fans asking why Mr. Gaming Chat had a question that I think he retracted. We'll see if he posts that again. Board fans, why is it that the best designers are indies?
Well, that's because when you're a designer in the AAA game industry, you have to compromise everything because you're not making the decisions on the product. The vice president of production is, and they're going to have things that they want you to do, and you're going to do it, or they're going to put someone else in your place. So you can't really design what's in your heart. I mean, there may be exceptions, of course, but most of the time, at least the stuff that I saw, is there's money people making the decision and not game people making the decision. And in indie, you can do whatever you want to, and you can really stretch your wings and really try new things. That's why you see a lot more different things in indie than you do in AAA. AAA is kind of, once something makes it, everybody's going to jump on that camp. They're going to ride that gravy train, as Pink Floyd likes to say.
I have a three-word answer for this question. Data-driven design.
Yep.
It's the slayer of innovation.
I think when it comes to indies, though, they were talking about, I think it was Jack was talking about how the indies can do whatever they want. Yeah, generally, when you look at indies, the designer is normally the CEO kind of thing, because they have this dream for this game they want to make, so they fund it, and then they make it.
Well, I have another theory to add. I don't disagree with anything that was said. These are all true things, and the old establishment of video game development has many, many, many flaws and many, many very sound reasons to disagree with it. However, I think at its essence, the reason why you're going to start seeing better and better designers in the indie space is that us designers get better the more we iterate. And in the bigger projects, if the data-driven design really only works on the mobile side of things, because a lot of the AAA devs don't know how to do that. But
if it takes them 6 years to get to market, where's their data?
Yeah. I mean, my feeling, if I'm not mistaken, the Blizzard didn't look at their user data for World of Warcraft until year 6. But that aside, so we get better when we iterate, and in the bigger environments, in the more kind of hierarchically structured environments, we don't get to try stuff. There's too much money being spent every single second of every single day, and so risk tolerance is really depressed. And so as a result, the entire department of design doesn't get to turn the crank enough times to get good. So it'll or not, that's not the right way to say it, but they will move slower. And so the indie developers, they have an entirely opposite set of problems where they're like burning out of money really rapidly, and they need to iterate as quickly as possible and hope they find something that's kind of explosive and good. And as a result, they're rushing at full speed. They're exhausted running the treadmill. And then the AAA developers are like frustrated that they can't, that they filled out the forms to get access to plug in the treadmill, but they haven't heard back yet.
Yeah, I've said this many times. I think that iteration is the key to game development.
It is. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Well, but
that and shipping a game, that's also, if you just iterate, you won't get there.
Your Excel spreadsheet guys are probably going to respond and say, "Oh, we're constantly iterating," but the thing is, but they're not innovating. So I don't know. I think there has to be some sort of smart innovation going on. And yeah, you could just put out 50 products and then hit it on the 50th one like Robio did with Angry Birds and just get lucky. But I personally don't like to burn through money like that. I like to figure out what it is that's going to be successful and then build it, instead of just trying to get lucky with other people's money, which is not my style, and it's super high risk unless you just have rich friends.
Yeah, I mean,
the Excel spreadsheet guys are probably like, I'm iterating by adding 0.0000001 to the stat that will grow over the next 3,000 hours. And this one, we're taking away 0.0002.
By definition, that's iteration.
Yeah.
We might go so far to round out the explanation, though. We might also say that the average indie designer is weaker than the average console big AAA designer. And that's partially because of the large numbers of them and kind of a limitation on how much experience you can get. Like it's ultimately for the exact same reason, kind of like how you'll blow on your hands to warm them up, as well as blow on your soup to cool it down. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No, but there seems like some really deep truth there. If I could just get it.
Nice metaphor.
it's just that iteration is what you live and die on, right? And so plenty of indies don't get to iterate because they burn out of cash. They don't have, they're too busy trying to survive to work. I mean, there's all the same reasons that create stability for the AAA developers is both a reason to that suppresses and enables kind of indie development.
Yeah, and again, like going to like some of like the struggles of getting a game out the door. That's another roundtable topic, I think, right there. But we had a few questions come in for chat. I know we are knocking on time, so we'll get to them. I have one final question. I'll throw it over to you guys if you have anything else you want to add, and then we will wrap things up for our table tonight. So, Mr. Game Chat, this was a question you asked earlier. They asked, are there any video game genres any one of you feel that can be combined with the MOBA genre to create a whole new experience that doesn't feel like a MOBA ripoff? And I mean, the MOBA genre, we've seen developers, like, again, like when, as we were saying earlier about how AAA tends to cannibalize or take from all the runs. I mean, when League of Legends blew up, we saw everybody try to do something along those lines. And we could, as a very interesting tangent, we could also say the same thing about Battle Royale and how that's been going in all manner of directions. I mean, Fall Guys is essentially 3D platformer Battle Royale.
Mm-hmm. We're talking MOBA, not mobile, right?
Yeah, MOBA, M-O-B-A, yeah.
Okay.
Is there any games that are like MOBA but not MOBA that you can instantly make a successful game? Why don't you tell me, because I'll be working on it if I know what that is.
I don't know if it'd be successful.
That's a good question. It's there's no answer, because you can work on. I mean, you can grab the next big thing and utterly fail, or you can grab the next big thing and have the biggest game in the world. Look at your example of Battle Royale. You had Fortnite basically lifted every one of their design mechanics, and they went through the roof. And then you had, other games do exactly the same thing, and they utterly failed. So it's like, it may not just be the game design; it may have other aspects that are playing into it, like art, sounds. There might be other things that are happening in the game that are gonna take that idea and push it into the stratosphere. And it's hard to tell what it is. You don't know what it is until you have it, in a way, because people are playing it and they want to keep playing it, or they're not playing it, and you can't make them play it. So that's a tough question.
I think that quality of live support is one of the most important reasons why Fortnite is successful against its competitors, though.
What does that mean?
Just that their events, the rate at which they continue to funnel content to their user base, the way they treat their user base, the kind of time patterns stretch out over the course of months and months. And I think you can see like the good example of that, or the easy to see example of that, is how Modern Warfare 2 guys, Infinity Ward, and Apex, and ultimately Apex is quite a good game, but they developed it, they shipped it, and then they kind of stopped, right?
Yeah.
And it was a huge explosion for a brief period of time, but then without the support, it wasn't able to do the most important thing, right? Which is hold audience for potentially unlimited periods of time.
Well, and didn't Cliffy B try to do that? Wasn't Lawbreakers kind of a battle royale game that utterly flopped?
Lawbreakers was the kind of Overwatch style game, and then they did almost like a rush job for it was supposed to be like an 80s throwback battle royale. I don't remember the name of it. I think that lasted like a month, maybe a month and a half, and then the whole studio collapsed at that point.
I don't think the game lasted a day, because I think it was on day one they were having so much problems getting a match going.
Radical Heights, that's the one.
Yeah.
And
to this day, old school developers don't know that the moment you ship is the beginning of crunch.
Yep. Especially in today's market. Like, going to what Ramin was saying earlier about developing or anything about content years out for his game, that one of the things that we've seen, especially from like the mobile space, so that the games that do succeed, they are already thinking about what they're doing like next month, a month after that. Like it doesn't end when the game is released, and even I think some of the independent developers tend to struggle with that when you don't think about what if people want more of my game? Can I provide it for them? And post-release support that's another topic in of itself.
Well, I mean, you might have a backlog of stuff you want to do, but
Mhm.
that, like any good, well, they say any good plan falls apart the second it hits the battlefield, right? I mean,
Hmm.
you don't know which direction you need to go until you get it out there. And you may have the perfect best idea in the world, but you do something and you get no response for it, or someone goes crazy over something else, and then you got to move in that direction.
I'd
So
like to I'd like to respond to the previous question before it's completely gone. MOBAs. I think there's an upper limit to how much entertainment you can deliver in a MOBA because of the real time aspect of the gameplay. Your players will fatigue too rapidly, and thus I think there's a physiological limit to how much you can charge them for that experience, and how much you can retain them. So I think that that's why I think that maybe it's just the data is starting to clue people in on this fact, and that's why we're seeing more auto battlers, because an auto battler is not fatiguing. The computer can do all this way faster than you can, and you can sit back and enjoy it and watch it. I think that's more the trend, the future. It's certainly the way I'm going with my designs. I want you to be able to spend as much time in the metagame deciding your strategy and what you're going to do next, and what you're going to do next week, and what you're going to do next month, and with who you're going to do it, and then let the computer run it for you while you watch.
Mm-hmm.
it's a good point.
I know Ratstail asked a question earlier that actually feeds into my final question, so we will save that. So I know we are knocking on time. So for the panel, do you have anything you want to add or any topics you want to raise about adding value to a game that to touch on?
I was just going to say that if you combined a MOBA with an idle game, that no one would think you're ripping off League of Legends.
Uh,
The serious answer from my perspective is I am a hardcore PC gamer. I play lots and lots of long hours total played games, and the work that I often do is geared towards making a satisfying and very long ass in seat kind of play experience, mostly mimicking the long hours of ass in seat that I've done myself.
Personally, I think you go deep rather than wide when you're designing a game. If you want to get more, you want to get a bigger price point, because I think if you just have a game mechanic and then you just change the color of the monster or something like that, I think players today are too shrewd, and they eat right through that, and it doesn't work for them. So you've got to give them something to think about and walk away from the game. So I try to go deeper rather than have a whole bunch of different content. I try to make something that takes you a while to think about and takes you a while to play, and then you get it and you're like, oh my God, this is a great game. I think for me, that's the way I work, but it certainly may not be the way everybody works.
I agree with you, Jack. Like I think that you need at least a certain depth. You don't need to be like super deep kind of thing, but you need to have a certain depth, because it seems like once you hit a certain depth, like I don't know, like critical mass on that, you'll hold on to a player kind of thing. And as you'll hold on to the player, you can keep them along for more hours, because in the end, it doesn't matter how long your game is, it matters how long they play kind of thing. Where if it's just, super shallow, then they're going to play it for like 3 minutes and be like, there's 500 million levels to this game, but I don't even want to play the second one because it ain't fun.
Yeah.
I would say plan for success. Assume your game is going to be successful. Build 3 times the content you're going to need, and make sure players know you have 3 times the content that they're going to have. Otherwise, this prevents 2 things. One, you could have a game that's a hit, but then people run out of content and churn out. You don't want to give players a chance to churn out. And the other thing is you want to signal to whales that, like I said before, that they can take like 3 weeks before they start spending. That there's 6 months of content, and that the money they spend in the first month is going to benefit them for the next 6 months, and so they will. Otherwise, they won't.
That's real good advice.
Mhm.
All right. And I think Brian asked earlier, Brian or Juan, asked about if we had any thoughts on Marvel's The Avengers failing that game. I don't know if anyone played it or can comment on it.
I didn't play it, so I have no idea. Did it fail?
I think it's like
Wow,
It's-
you gotta really blow it to fail in an Avengers game. That's all I gotta say on that, man.
Yeah.
The #1 movie of all time and the #1 comic of all time, and you make a failure of a game. That takes hard work.
Aren't we all experiencing a little bit of like Marvel IP burnout though?
I'm not.
Star Wars,
I love it. I
IP
can't-
burnout.
Well, Star Wars. I mean, Star Wars, yeah, for me. But Marvel, I'm looking forward to the Eternals and Scarlet Witch, WandaVision, and Falcon and Soldier. I can keep going with that. I mean, how long has comic books been
But I
going?
mean, Marvel, Star Wars, Star Trek, Warhammer. The problem is when you put out 15 bad games with an IP, you train your customers to ignore the 16th one.
Well,
That's true, but how many bad Avengers? There's not that many bad Avengers games. I mean, there's a ton of bad Star Trek games, that's for sure, and they keep putting them out, and I keep downloading them and playing them too, like an idiot. But Marvel Avengers game, it's like that was a 3D superhero action game,
Yeah.
right? As far as I know, I saw the ads for it. I don't know what the gameplay is like, but I find it curious that it failed because I mean it's obviously a solid IP.
I think this is the beginning of the training, Ramin.
Yeah, somebody says movie tie-in games being bad. Yeah, it's true. Definitely, movie tie-in games or licensed games because I think gamers know they're making it for the money and not for the game. But we've had movie tie-in games that have changed the industry, like Dune 2. I go back to that one, and that was a movie tie-in game, and that basically invented the modern RTS, game mode.
Yeah,
So,
Dune 2 is great.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I love Dune 2.
We feel like we kind of brought back success in movie titles between Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2.
You guys did.
That was the beginning, right? And then Batman, Arkham
Great
rolls
games.
in, right? And then there's this kind of wave.
Mhm.
But I think the biggest reason why Avengers failed is because I think it is an impossible game to make. Obviously the Spider-Man games did great. There's one character. That one character occupies an entire development cycle, and it is overwhelmingly difficult to make that one game good. Good luck making Avengers.
Marvel's Spider-Man turned out incredibly well. Marvel's Avengers did not.
I
Yeah,
don't
Yeah,
know.
Miles, I hear, is
the new one.
amazing.
Yeah, the new one for PlayStation 5. I
Yeah.
hear I've got a lot of friends who worked on that, and they're just going through the roof on that. But they've been making Spider-Man games for a while. I mean, Spider-Man
That's true.
came out like in PlayStation 2, and they got it right that time. And now almost every time that you make a Spider-Man game, you kind of work on that formula where you got that web swing and stuff like that. But then when they came out with a Superman game, and that was so bad that they haven't made a Superman game since, right? I mean, or nothing that's really been standing out since the original Nintendo Superman 64 or whatever that was that everybody hated, and no one can make a good game about that. No one wants to touch Superman.
I
So-
You can't pay me enough to make a Superman game, seriously. And I jump in on a Spider-Man game in a heartbeat.
I'd make a Superman game today, but I'd make it a VR game. I'd make it first person, and I think it'd be awesome.
First person flying through rings.
I was there for one of the Superman games that Activision was working on, and I got to see firsthand why it was so hard. And there's certain characters are easier to make interesting games about. What were you going to say, Roman?
Oh, okay, thanks. I was going to say that it's very difficult to take a movie and then just make a game out of it. I think that's very challenging for a number of reasons that I'm not going to go into for time factors. But I think what works better is you create a very in-depth game that would fit a number of specific IPs in a genre, and then you sell it to those companies, which is what I'm trying to do, maybe perhaps these days. And then when you've shown that the game is successful in a neutral IP, then you start negotiating how to put their IP on top of your game for the double whammy. Like with Niantic, had a fairly generic game that proved somewhat successful. They showed that the technology worked. And then they pulled in Pokemon and put that on the top, and bam, huge hit.
Yeah.
I don't know if I 100% agree with you, Tomo, because I think you can do a multiple hero kind of game that really works well, because there's several X-Men games that I think were quite good, kind of thing.
Turn-based, right?
As tons of characters, kind of thing. I think, I didn't play the new Marvel's Avengers game, but I did watch Josh play it, and the issue I think that game really had was not the license. It was the fact that nothing of the license actually mattered in there, because what it felt like was a very super generic game that had nothing to it but maybe some data-driven microtransaction system to it, and then it's like, hey, let's just put Marvel Avengers over the top of it and do nothing to the gameplay, because you take the Incredible Hulk in there and you expect to feel strong. You expect to just hit a guy and he goes flying out of view, kind of thing. But you take the Hulk, you fight the most generic plain villain from that is just a human kind of thing, and you hit them 12 times to deplete their HP down enough that they actually die, kind of thing.
Because the Hulk needs to level up. I mean, that fits the canon, right?
Yeah, and you have to buy all these cosmetics and upgrades and all this equipment. It's like Avengers aren't equipment based. Avengers,
Well,
the characters.
Iron Man is pretty equipment based.
Well, yeah.
It has to fit my spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm looking at Metacritic, and it got a 68 from critics and a 3.1 from. They just made a bad game, it looks like.
Wait, users was way lower than the critics?
3.1.
Never
Wow.
would have
Out
got
of 269 ratings, 3.1. That is a game people do not like right there.
Mm-hmm.
A game like Marvel Legos has a massive amount of content. Watching my godson play this, it's just so many characters and stuff in that game. But it's aimed at the wrong demographic. If I had that much content and I could make a game for adults using it, wow, I could make a crazy amount of money. Don't give that much content to kids. Give it to adults. They need it.
I almost bought the Avengers game today. I was at Best Buy, and I was looking for something new, and I was like, Avengers, I wonder if that's any good. And I'm glad I passed on it at this point.
I think it's already on deep sale, I think, for Black Friday and such.
I think it's like $29 or something.
Yeah. Oof. Let me see. Again, we just sit here and ran, but I guess unless you guys have anything else you want to throw in, or one thing, we were talking about bad Spider-Man games. I played the LGN Spider-Man game for the NES way back then. There's my first exposure to Spider-Man. But
we were talking about good Spider-Man games.
But I guess. Anything else you guys want to add before I kind of bring up the final question for the chat?
There's another question?
Yeah. I know, we go on these rants, and then it's like, wait, what were we talking about? But
we always have to make it to 2 hours, right? With that final question.
Yes.
That's
okay.
For me, no.
Roller.
Okay. So this is kind of a combination of my question and Rat's Tail's question from earlier. And this kind of gets back at the heart of our discussion today. And this idea of really adding value to your game. Like we've said, we've talked about $4 games, we've talked about $34 games. And what I want to ask is, for everyone here, do you think there is a possibility of going big in terms of these smaller ideas? Take a 2D platformer one of the most popular and often copied genres among indie developers. Could we make a $60 version of that kind of game? Stardew Valley. What was that?
I said Mario doesn't exist.
Yeah, but Mario's 3D. Like, can an indie developer on their own go big? To make a $60 Stardew Valley today, or a $60 Shovel Knight game, and then to bring in Rat's Tales a comment, do you think it's possible for us to see an indie developer with a AAA budget? Like, could those two elements actually work? And of course, I know people are going to bring up No Man's Sky here as well.
Well, they wouldn't be an indie developer if they had a AAA budget.
I don't know about that.
They could if they knew what they were doing and wrote it up well enough that they could pitch it to investors.
Or just made enough games that were popular enough before that, like the FTL developers, the Stardew Valley developers. Those people have made a lot of money. They could.
Well, right. You're going to need to prove, if you're going to get investors involved and go AAA, you're going to need to prove to them that you have a track record.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you get the investors, then you're no longer independent.
Well, there are plenty of indie studios that have investors.
Yeah.
It's a blurry line between indie and AAA. I mean, if it has a huge budget, it's probably a AAA game, even if it's made by an indie team. I would think, because it's you're not going to make a $20 million game without a $10 million marketing budget. It's just not going to happen, right? So I think once you have a certain amount of money, it's not an indie game anymore. It's a big one. It's a AAA, because AAA is more like quality, I think, more than anything. I mean, it's money, but it's also quality. It's a quality thing that you look at it and you go, yeah, that's a AAA.
I don't think you necessarily have to have a lot of money to get that quality, though, because I think there are smaller ways to do that kind of thing, like just really good 2D art, like Ori and the Blind Forest.
Ori was probably kind of expensive.
With Cloudwalker, I'm designing it in layers, so that we can fully build out the first layer and then put the next layer on top and the next layer, and each layer acts as a proof of concept for the next layer, so that by the time we get to the sixth layer, it's a massive game, but reliably proven. And I'm looking to start at like $5 million, and I'm plotting for an expected income of over $50 million per month by year 2.
Yeah, and Totoma, Ori was a very expensive game, but compared to AAA, it was very, very cheap.
Well, if we were to lay out all the budgets for all the games that we could find out there, I think you'll find that the really big budgets is actually a fairly small percentage of the kind of big team industry. And we know those names, right? There's really not going to be a title that gets released that everybody doesn't know of, that are kind of in those truly large budget ranges, and that everyone else, actually, the higher end indies get real close to the lower end AAAs, and we're not even talking about how mobile kind of throws that entire structure on its head and has kind of like no resemblance to like the Steam PC to kind of console dev publishing relationship. That mobile doesn't match any of that, right? That you have games and how they look and how much money they cost and how much money they're making is very much going to be very surprising for people who've been like maybe tracking and keeping up with console and PC.
World of Tanks, World of Warships, they were made on pretty small budgets, and I think they were pulling in $500 million a year. Do you consider those AAA?
I mean, eventually.
Yeah, I would. I'd consider those AAA. They're pretty big. They're pretty big teams that are making those games. Like,
well, now
teams,
they're huge,
but not expensive teams.
Expensive relative to where they're located. I mean,
you build it in Belarus, it wasn't expensive. I designed World of Tanks Blitz in 11 weeks, and the metagame for World of Warships in 3.5 months.
Yeah, I personally don't conflate cost or with being AAA. I do it like I conflate it in the way that do you control your own thing or do you not control your own thing? And not controlling it, you're not independent. Somebody else is calling the shots above you, or beside you, kind of thing, which would be like a board. It would be like investors kind of thing. It would be like you've got to put in microtransactions and you've got to, abuse the heck out of them, kind of thing. And you don't have any choice. You've got to do that. At that point, you're not independent. You're not making your own decisions. I would consider independent as in being alone and making your own decisions, kind of thing, whether you had a $1 billion budget or not, kind of thing. Of course, generally, you don't see people with $1 billion budgets, kind of thing, being the sole person, making the decisions. Normally there's a board of directors and a board of this, a board of that. So many boards, I get bored of it.
Well, I mean, I look at it as I go to investors and I say, what do you think? Will the game be better if I have limited control over design or full control over design? And maybe earlier in my career, the answer was limited control on my design until I can prove that I know what I'm doing. At this point, I think the answer is full control. And presumably I can design games better than the games I've made before.
Mm-hmm. I think you're sort of an exception, though.
I've been doing it a while, yeah. Tim's also been doing it a while. I think all of us here, right? That's why we're here.
Though, to answer the question directly, I think the answer is yes. I do think the question maybe has some flaws ultimately, just because of the kind of fuzzy nature of some of the terms that we're trying to use here. As you can see just in that little bit of conversation, how it's kind of hard there's not a firm definition of AAA and indie. Even when you say an indie with a AAA budget, that doesn't necessarily mean anything necessarily, depending on your point of view. But for sure, a small group of people can make something outstanding and competitive at the world stage. And that we see it happen occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you want to innovate, you kind of almost have to drop down to indie to do it, because the AAA environment just isn't conducive to innovation. If you hit it and then want to build back up at a AAA budget, I think that's pretty effective.
Yeah. One thing as like a slight tangent I was thinking about is like going to Ramin's idea with Cloudwalker, with building things up year by year. This idea of releasing a game and adding enough content to justify raising that price. Because again, it's something we don't often see. I know Shovel Knight may be one of the few exceptions that if you try to buy Shovel Knight, if you buy Shovel Knight now, it is now being priced at $40 retail, and that's because it includes all the DLC that came with it. When that game first came out, I think it was $15 or $20. And do you think we'll see developers try and go that route of, putting so much into these games that they can justify raising the price, or is that still considered the taboo strategy?
I think the only way that you can pull that off is if you do it slowly and as you add a lot more content, kind of thing. Because like every one of their content boosts, their DLCs were pretty meaty, kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
and they were worth adding a few dollars to the price, kind of thing. So they did.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to design the game from the very beginning for that type of expansion.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. All right, but I know we are, as always, we have ran late, and I'm glad we had really great conversation. Again, we could just sit here and talk for a few more hours, but I know everyone has to get going. So, with that said, I'm going to give everyone a chance to kind of go around. If you have anything social media you want to plug, current projects, whatever, go nuts. So, once again, we'll start with Tomo and go right ahead.
It was great being here. It was a ton of fun having this conversation about stuff, as always. I am working on a game called Epic Tavern. We are still in early access. We stream pretty regularly on a weekly basis, and you can find us on Twitch and and on Discord, both epictavern.twitch.tv/Epic Tavern and discord.gg/Epic Tavern.
It's a great game.
All right. And to Jack?
We just put a beta out that anybody can play. That's in my description. I think you posted the link. Alienware is distributing it, so you can give it a try and let me know what you think. It's in the black, and my studio is Impeller Studios.
And to Rami?
It's too early for me to show you Cloudwalker because I'm doing the design first, but I'm designing intensely on it. And I'm very excited about this. It's the first time I've really had total design authority on a project that might potentially have enough budget to make it.
Good luck on that.
Yeah, good luck.
Right. And to Sharp?
As for me, I'm working on a game, Neon Continuum, at the moment, which is a grid-based strategy card game with a theme of sci-fi, which that all kind of coalesces in a cyberpunk world. And it's very strategy based. It's going to be a free to play with a brand new consumer friendly model, which hopefully will make money. We'll have to wait and see on that. And we do testing on it in our Discord. So if you want to come and play it when we have a playable version anyway, join our Discord kind of thing. I also do streaming on YouTube, do the weekly stream with Josh. I do on Sundays, do dev streams on Fridays, where I should work on the game and you guys get to see and whatnot. And I do game streams on Tuesday, aka today. And, have lots of fun with that. And, I got a Twitter at Nexus Games INC1. And all the links to my YouTube, Twitch, Discord, all that will be down in the description below.
All right. And I guess from myself, again, if you're watching this, you know who I am from Game Wisdom, but you can follow me on Twitter at GWBicer. I just finished writing my third book, Game Design Deep Dive Roguelikes. That's a top-to-bottom discussion on the design of roguelike games and design. That will hopefully be out by April. I think the publisher pushed that back, and I am beginning to work on my fourth book, all about horror. And if you are interested in all this stuff, be sure to check out my Discord and Patreon link down below. And there are links to everybody's works in the description as well. So, with that said, everybody, thank you so much for coming on for this month's roundtable. For those of you watching this, we will be back next month for another discussion and topic. If you'd like to pitch one for us to cover, let us know in the comments. But other than that, that will do it. So again, everybody, thanks for coming on. This was a lot of fun.
Later.
Bye, guys.
Thanks for having me back, gentlemen.
No problem. And
Good having you, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, good meeting you.
All right. So with that said, everyone, I will be back later for my regular game streaming, but come back for delayed discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where he's in the art and science of games. Have a great night, everybody, and take care.